we move on to a very, very special LeaderSpeak at Hope session. I request all of you to kindly be seated and have your attention here, because this is not a conversation you would like to miss. It is a privilege to bring to this platform one of the most influential global leaders in hospitality, someone who's steering one of the world's largest hotel companies through a period of sustained growth, transformation, and global expansion. Ladies and gentlemen, get ready for a very special conversation. Joining us virtually, please welcome President and CEO Marriott International, Anthony Capuano, in a very special conversation with President and CEO South Asia HVS ANAROCK, Mr. Mandeep Lamba.
Tony, what a pleasure to see you. I know it's very, very early in the part of the world that you're in, and I'm really, really privileged and honored that you, agreed to do this session. You and I have been meeting.
Well, I couldn't be happier to be back, so thank you so much for the invitation.
You and I have been meeting in New York for the last 2 years, and we've been trying to get you into India for Hope. And for some reason or the other, our stars are not aligning yet, but we're not giving up hope on seeing you here in physical presence.
Well, I hope you don't. I figure I'll extend my invitation by not being there in person. So hopefully next year I'll be sitting there and able to shake your hand. And thank you for being such a gracious host.
Absolutely, Tony. Looking forward to that. And okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got Tony, and it's difficult to find time with Tony. So we need to do this, and we need to do it quickly. Travel has, Tony, remained remarkably resilient. Despite all the geopolitical volatility and capital tightening and everything else. In your opinion, is this now a structural shift rather than a cyclical rebound?
Yeah, I believe it is. I think maybe try to give you two answers. One that is a little philosophical and one that I think is a little more data-driven. Like many in your audience, when the pandemic began to unfold, we all had to figure out how to fill our time. And for me, I looked in my office and I had about a 10-meter stack of books that people have sent me over the years that I never had time to read. And I've got a deep interest in the ancient Roman Empire. And so I started trying to make my way through those books. And I saw a quote in one of the books that I was so taken by, literally, I wrote it on a slip of paper and I keep it in my wallet. And it was the ancient Roman philosopher Seneca. And he said, travel and change of place impart vigor to the mind. And what I loved about that quote, it's not as if travel became a global phenomenon with the launch of Instagram, right? It is embedded in our DNA. And people have, since the dawn of time, had this inherent appetite to explore the world, immerse themselves in new cultures, try new languages, experiment with new cuisines. And that's what gives me so much long-term optimism about the travel vertical. Then when I pivot to data, like many of our peers, we have some terrific branded credit card relationships. And one of the outstanding byproducts of those relationships is we have access to real-time data about consumer spending. And if you look at those trends over the last decade or so, pre-pandemic, you saw the younger demographics, you noticed it in their spending patterns. They had already started to prioritize spending in travel and experiences versus consumption of hard goods. If you look at that data today, even a few years removed from the pandemic, not only has that trend accelerated, but it's across demographics. And when I look at that data, that's probably the most tangible evidence I see that it is, in fact, a structural change, and a change that I expect to last into the foreseeable future.
In continuation to that, so you then believe that travel is becoming more a non-discretionary lifestyle spend?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I just see our consumers as a matter of practice, prioritizing that with their capital. You see the shift in discretionary spend moving towards travel and experiences. There have been a number of global studies talking about younger demographics actually taking on some measure of consumer debt to allow them to explore the world in the fashion that they would like to. And so, yeah, I think it is just a fundamental shift in how consumers are prioritizing their spending.
So Marriott, Tony, as you know, has been in India for over 2 decades. However, the last 5 years seem different. What do you think has fundamentally changed?
Yeah, a few things. Number one, we are trying to ride this extraordinary wave of momentum. You've got an administration under Prime Minister Modi that embraces and understands the importance of the travel vertical as a creator of jobs, as a driver of GDP, as an enabler of the development of skills for Indian nationals. I think the volume of growth in domestic travel among Indian travelers. In some ways, we may talk a little bit about some of the parallels between India and China, but to me, that's one of the most fundamental parallels. What really acted as a catalyst for the explosive growth we've seen in lodging in China was the emergence of that middle class with this ravenous appetite to explore their own country. And you're seeing a parallel phenomenon in India. And then I think third, you've got this, it is hard, living in the States to be sure, it's hard to pick up a travel-related publication or a newspaper or anything else that not only doesn't talk about India, but talks about the richness and the diversity of the destinations and experiences that can be found in India. And so you've got this powerful combination of accelerated growth in domestic travel in India and an increasingly high and growing awareness of the richness of the destination for inbound international travelers.
You've indicated in some of your statements that I've been reading that India could soon be among Marriott's top global markets. Is India now a strategic pillar market and not necessarily just a growth market?
Yeah, it absolutely is for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which is just the sheer scale of the population in India, the growing awareness and appeal of India. Today, India is our 4th largest market globally. I know Raj was on stage earlier. If I say we expect it to be our 3rd largest market in 3 years, he may shout from the audience, it'll be in 2 years. Last year, we had the most significant signings volume in our history in India. We did over 10,000 rooms of signing. So it is just a matter of probably 2 to 3 years before India becomes the company's 3rd largest market. And in terms of your comment about pillar, it's not just an explosive growth market. When you look at the demographic trends across India, it is with each passing day an increasingly critically important outbound market as well. So absolutely a pillar market.
So Tony, Raj is in the audience, and when you said that we're moving, India is going to move from the 4th to the 3rd, so he stood up and said, no, it's going to be from 4th to number 1. So he just did that. So
I'll be happy to share that with all my colleagues here in Washington and incorporate that into Raj's budget next year as well.
You chose India as the launch market for Series by Marriott, including an equity structure. That's a departure from traditional asset-light model. What does that signal?
Well, I think at its core, it signals a deep, deep confidence in the long-term future of India as a pillar market and as a growth market. Number 2, it is reflective of the deep expertise that we see across India, this expertise and this passion for hospitality, which is a bet that we want to make over and over again. And then I think number 3, when you and I spoke last year, I talked about the privilege I had to spend time in two separate occasions with your prime minister. And what I found so interesting and encouraging was he got right to the point and talked about he said, I love your portfolio in India's primary cities. I'd rather spend the bulk of our time talking about your growth plans in the secondary and tertiary markets, which will expose the traveling public to some amazingly diverse destinations across India and represent an opportunity for us to create real career opportunities for our citizens in those markets. And so when I look at something like Series by Marriott, which really focuses on mid-scale and upscale product, it's a massive opportunity for us in those secondary and tertiary markets.
By the way, Prime Minister Modi sent a message saying that he missed meeting you this time.
Well, it is one of the great privileges of this role is I get the opportunity to meet with many leaders around the world. I can say without hesitation, he was the most prepared, most informed world leader I think I've ever met with. And it was not a room full of his advisors. There were 3 people in the room. He was very well briefed on Marriott's presence. He obviously understands the power of travel and what it can do for the broader Indian economy. And I can't wait to have the privilege to spend a little more time with him.
You spoke, Tony, a little earlier about China. Marriott's China expansion was spectacular. In your mind, what must India get right to perhaps replicate that scale over the next decade?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's already coming. I think the demographic trends that India enjoys are going to be a powerful catalyst for the sort of growth that we expect to see in India in the coming years and coming decades. I think number 2, the focus on growth beyond the primary cities and the power of opportunity that exists in secondary and tertiary markets. I think the rising middle class wealth, the expansion and the quality of the infrastructure across India, and just this inherent expertise and passion that exists for hospitality, both on the development and the operating side. You throw all of that together, that is a pretty powerful narrative that will guide the sort of explosive growth that we expect to see across India.
Tony, let's just step back a little, and I want to talk about, it's been a decade since the Starwood acquisition. One of perhaps the boldest moves in hospitality history. Looking back, would you change anything at all?
That's a good question. I think we probably, with the benefit of hindsight, maybe underestimated a bit the complexity of the technology integration of the 2 companies. And then I think we had the right instincts on marrying the 2 loyalty platforms, but perhaps we underestimated a bit the depth of passion that the SPG members had. We knew that the loyalty model of SPG was troublesome for the owner community. And that was perhaps a bit of an impediment to the pace of growth that Starwood hoped to achieve. And we thought if we could blend the 2, some of the value proposition dilution for the SPG members would ideally be offset by the breadth of the portfolio that would now be available to those members of the combined program. And while that certainly proved itself to be the case, I think, again, with the benefit of hindsight, the depth of passion for SPG, we should have understood a little better, and it might have led to a little smoother transition.
Amazing.
But some of the intellectual underpinnings of the transaction, at the risk of being a little silly, this notion that size matters and scale matters in terms of creating opportunities for our associates, in terms of giving a breadth of choice to our guests, in terms of creating a global scale and an infrastructure within Bonvoy that could create this ecosystem where ideally our guests would never need to look outside for any travel need. I think those intellectual underpinnings have held relatively true over this first decade.
Fabulous. I really like the very candid sort of response I got to that, and the way you've put it into perspective. I thought that was absolutely wonderful, Tony. We talked about you meeting Prime Minister Modi regularly.
Yeah.
If you were meeting India's top policymakers tomorrow, what 3 initiatives would you advocate to accelerate hospitality's contribution to GDP and employment?
Yeah, I think before I started asking, I would start with a very sincere thank you. I think for any global market to see the sort of explosive growth that India has enjoyed, it requires a sincere public-private partnership, and I would thank the administration for all of the tangible efforts they've made to build a real partnership. But like anything else, it has to continue to grow and evolve. So maybe a few. I think we've had some conversations about the tax framework and the relative global competitiveness of the tax framework in India. So I would likely continue to raise some issues there. I think recognition of the hospitality infrastructure investment more formally and the impact that can have on long-term financing and the manner in which that might unlock additional capital flow would clearly be a focus area. And then I think back to my dear friend Arnie, who met with Prime Minister Modi probably 15 years ago. And he used to love to tell this story. The first time he had a chance to meet with the Prime Minister, he talked about the number of individual licenses that were required to build a hotel in India. And then maybe a year later, Arnie attended a dinner in New York. I think it was as part of the general UN session. And he had a chance to see the Prime Minister again. And the Prime Minister was very proud to point out that they had reduced the number of licenses required by about half, which is an extraordinary achievement, but it's still a big, big number. And so that would probably be the third issue that I would focus on, is what can we do together, again, through this lens of public-private partnership to further streamline the regulatory process to get shovels in the ground.
Earlier today, we had the Secretary of Tourism, Government of India, do the keynote address, and also earlier in the Owners Conclave. And this was again a hotly discussed topic on how the licenses can be reduced, and this is something that the government continues to work harder on, and hopefully that will change. Okay, Arnie, as we come closer to finishing this conversation with you, much as I would hate to, but I know that you have other things that you have planned. One word for India in 2035.
Optimism.
Fabulous. AI, always the elephant in the room. Transformational or incremental?
Well, first of all, I'm impressed. You waited longer to raise AI than any journalist, consultant, analyst that I've met with in the last 2 years. So I congratulate you for not letting AI consume the entirety of the conversation. Listen, my view, and again, this is one person's view, AI is going to be extraordinarily impactful to every business sector in the world. The nature of its impact will vary widely. One of the things that creates maybe an incremental layer of complexity for your audience, we are in the human connection business. I've had students ask me whether I could envision a circumstance in the future that as a result of advances in robotics and technology and AI, whether we could run a hotel with no employees. And my answer is always, gosh, I hope not, right? We are in the human connection business. And so I think for our industry, in the above property, there are tremendous opportunities to incorporate AI. There are efficiencies that can be achieved. I think the entirety of the distribution landscape will be disrupted by AI. But at the property level, I view the biggest power of AI is the creation of capacity for our associates. If as a result of the implementation of these technologies, we can create 30, 60, 90 seconds of incremental capacity when at the end of a long, difficult day of travel, you show up at the front desk of one of our hotels, and that associate, enabled and empowered by technology, can look you in the eye, can pick up on visual and verbal cues, figure out why you had such a rough day of travel, and make a couple little changes to enhance your travel. That in some ways may be the most significant power that these technologies will have on our industry.
Very, very interesting, Tony. I think there's always this whole debate about what it will do and what it won't do, and whether hospitality should embrace this whole AI, and whether we are a people's business, which we are, and how we need to use it more for efficiency rather than replacing the human touch, clearly. And before we finally end this conversation, one leadership habit that you swear by.
Well, I'm not going to try to take credit for it. I'm going to refer again to our dear old friend Arnie, who we lost so tragically. If you read some of the tributes that were written about Arnie after his passing, the thing that struck me is some of the most personal, passionate things I read were from guests and other business people who maybe only had met Arnie for 4 or 5 minutes in the porte cochere of a hotel. But the reason they felt like they knew him and connected with him is he was an incredible listener. And it's one of the things, I talk to my daughter, who's 25, about this all the time. It's one of the skills that I worry is evaporating. The commitment it takes to be an engaged listener in this current world we find ourselves in, where there are so many distractions with electronic devices and news crawls across the bottom of the screen. The ability to put the devices away, to look into the eyes of the counterparty you're speaking with, and to really actively listen is as strong a leadership skill as I think I've ever seen. I don't pretend for a moment to be as strong a listener as Arnie was, but it's something I work deliberately every day to try to improve.
I couldn't agree more. In this whole world where attention spans are just continuously decreasing, being a great listener is not only such a great gift, but difficult to achieve in today's world.
Absolutely.
Tony, thank you so much. I remain privileged of having done this conversation with you 2 times over, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at Hope maybe next year in person.
I would love it.
Where we can shake
I would
hands
love it.
and do this. Ladies and gentlemen, Tony Capuano, the world's most influential hospitality leader.
Mandeep, thank you so much for having me. And when I finally arrive there in person, dinner's on me.
Wow, I'm going to take you up on that, Tony. That's going to be one of the finest dinners I've ever had. Look forward to that, Tony. Thank you very much.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you
Enjoy
so
the
much.
rest of the conference. Take care.